I woke up that morning to the sound of rustling plastic bags and hushed voices outside my bedroom door. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming some distant memory of a yard sale or packing for a trip, but as I sat up, the icy edge of reality cut through the fog in my mind. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, feet finding the worn carpet. My heart was already pounding that low, anxious beat you get when you just know something's not right. I opened the door slowly, my fingers trembling on the knob, and there it was. My world, the pieces of my life stuffed into black trash bags piled in the hallway. I stood frozen, taking it all in. My sweaters, the ones I'd knitted during endless winter nights. My books, their spines bent and covers creased from years of loving hands. Even the old quilt my mother had given me on my wedding day, now poking out of a bag like yesterday's rubbish. My daughter-in-law Tessa was there, her lips pressed into a tight line as she tied another bag shut. My son Aaron stood behind her, his arms crossed over his chest, eyes darting away from mine. "You're up," Tessa said briskly, not bothering to look at me. "We figured it was time to clear out some of the clutter. You've been here long enough." The words landed like a slap. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My throat felt tight, like every word I'd swallowed over the years had come back to choke me now. I glanced at Aaron, hoping maybe foolishly to find something there. Regret, hesitation. But he just looked away, his jaw set hard. That hurt more than anything. Tessa wiped her hands on her jeans and gave me a quick, almost bored smile. "You understand, right? It's just, you don't really fit in here anymore. We need the space." I wanted to laugh to ask her when exactly I'd stopped fitting in. Was it when my husband died and I moved in to help them raise the kids? Was it the night I'd stayed up with their sick baby so they could sleep? Or maybe it was all those quiet mornings I'd spent in this kitchen, brewing coffee and packing lunches so they could chase their dreams. But I didn't say any of that. I just stood there feeling the cold draft from the open window down the hall. My hands were steady, though my heart was a storm. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I knew there was no point. Instead, I nodded slowly, my eyes sweeping over the trash bags one last time. My life in plastic. My memories treated like clutter. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. It was like a door had quietly closed and another one had swung wide open. I turned and walked back into my room, shutting the door behind me with a soft click. I sat on the edge of the bed, my breath steadying with each passing second. I thought of the years I'd spent bending and twisting myself to fit into their lives, of the silent sacrifices, the countless times I'd told myself it was enough just to be needed. I thought of the woman I'd once been, strong, determined, unwilling to let anyone else tell her who she was. And I realized I was still that woman. I'd just forgotten it for a while. I reached for my phone, my fingers steady now, and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I hadn't thought about in years, my lawyer Helen. She'd helped me after my husband died, guiding me through the paperwork with calm, clear advice. She'd always told me, "You deserve to be treated with respect, no matter what." I pressed call, and when she answered, her voice was warm and steady. "Mrs. Tran," she said, surprised. "It's been a long time. What can I do for you?" I took a breath, my voice calm. "Helen," I said, "I think it's time we talked again. I need to know exactly what my rights are." There was a pause on the line, and then she said, "Of course. Let's set up a meeting." When I ended the call, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. Not over them or the past or how they saw me, but over myself. Over what came next. I looked back at the trash bags in the hall, and I didn't feel defeated. I felt ready. Because they might have put my things in those bags, but they'd just given me the push I needed to put their names in my lawyers. After I ended the call with Helen, I sat there for a moment, staring at the blank wall across from me. My room was so bare now, just the bed, the small dresser, and a chair I'd rescued from the curb years ago. Everything else I owned was in those trash bags outside my door, but I didn't feel empty. I felt clear. I took a long breath and got up. I could hear Tessa's laughter in the kitchen, the low hum of the coffee maker. The normal sounds of a family morning, but I no longer felt like part of that chorus. It was strange how one morning could make the distance between us feel like miles. I made my way to the window and pushed it open. The cold air stung my cheeks, but it was bracing like a slap that woke me up. I watched the street below cars, moving slowly in the early light, people bundled against the winter chill. Everyone had somewhere to be, something that belonged to them. And I realized that was all I wanted too, something of my own. The memories of how I'd ended up here played in my mind like an old film. My husband and I had built a life together in a small house with a big garden roses tomatoes, the laughter of our son echoing through the hallways. After he died, the house felt too quiet, too full of ghosts. Aaron had insisted I move in with him and Tessa. "We'll take care of you, Mom," he'd said. I'd believed him. For years I'd played the part of the grateful guest. I cooked, cleaned, babysat when they needed a break. I watched their children grow, soothed their fevers, wiped their tears. And I never asked for anything in return. I thought that was enough to make me family. I should have known better. But those memories didn't make me bitter. They just reminded me that I'd always done my best. I'd given them everything I could, and if they still didn't see my worth, well, that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I spent the morning packing the few things I still had in my room: my clothes, my photo albums, the small trinkets that had traveled with me from house to house. Each one was a piece of who I was, and I treated them with the care they deserved. Tessa didn't say much when she passed by my door. She just glanced in her lips, tightening when she saw the open suitcase. "You're not thinking of staying here, are you?" she asked, her voice laced with that same false sweetness she used when talking to strangers. I met her eyes calmly. "I'm not going anywhere just yet," I said. "But you and Aaron might want to speak to your lawyer. I'm sure he'll want to hear about how you treated me." She blinked, her mouth opening in surprise. For once, she didn't have a quick comeback. "I'm sure you thought you could just push me aside." I continued, my voice soft but firm. "But I have rights, and I intend to protect them." She looked like she wanted to argue, but instead, she just turned on her heel and walked away, her shoulders stiff. I knew then that she wasn't as sure of herself as she wanted me to believe. That afternoon, I took a bus across town to meet Helen. Her office was warm and inviting, with big windows that let in the pale winter light. She greeted me with a smile, offering me a cup of tea before we sat down to talk. "I'm sorry this has happened to you, Mrs. Tran," she said as she flipped through her notes. "But you're right, what they've done is more than just unkind. You have legal rights as a resident, and possibly as a dependent family member, depending on the situation." I nodded, relief washing over me in a slow wave. "I don't want to start a war," I told her. "I just want to make sure they can't treat me like garbage and get away with it." Helen smiled gently. "And that's exactly what we're going to do. We'll send them a letter first, let them know you're serious, and that you won't be pushed around." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't some old piece of furniture they could throw out with the trash. I was a woman with a voice, and I was finally ready to use it. When I left her office, the winter sun was already starting to set, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. I walked slowly, feeling each step as a small act of defiance. Tessa and Aaron might have tried to erase me from their lives, but I was still here. And I was stronger than they'd ever imagined. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was done bending, done trying to prove I belonged. Now I was ready to show them what belonging really looked like. The next few days moved with a strange sort of clarity. It felt like I was walking on a narrow path, each step measured and certain, each breath purposeful. I didn't tell Aaron or Tessa what I was planning. They'd made it clear enough how they felt about me. I didn't owe them an explanation anymore. Helen moved quickly, sending a formal letter that laid out my rights in no uncertain terms. She spoke with the steady calm of someone who knew the law inside and out. "This will make them pay attention," she said. "They won't be able to pretend you're invisible anymore." Those words stuck with me. Invisible. That was how I'd felt for so long, blending into the background of their busy lives, never wanting to cause trouble. I'd been the silent helper, the warm meal at the end of a long day, the soft voice telling them it would all be okay. but in the end, my silence had become a weapon against me. Not anymore. In the evenings, I sat by the small window in my room, looking out at the city lights. I thought about how I'd ended up here, how easily I'd let their needs become more important than my own. I realized it wasn't just about the bags in the hallway, or the cold words they'd used. It was about everything I'd let slip away in the name of peace, peace that was never really mine to begin with. I made a list in my notebook, a quiet inventory of what I needed to reclaim. My belongings, yes, but also my dignity, my space, my right to stand in my own home without feeling like a guest. When I was done writing, I felt lighter, as if every word on the page was a small piece of weight lifted off my chest. A few days later, Tessa knocked on my door. She didn't bother to hide her annoyance, her arms crossed tight over her chest. "Aaron said you're stirring things up," she began, her tone sharp. "Why can't you just let this go? We've given you so much." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the fear hidden behind her frustration. She wasn't used to being challenged. I'd always been the one to smooth things over to keep my head down, but not anymore. "I'm not stirring things up," I said calmly. "I'm just making sure I'm treated with respect. That's not so much to ask, is it?" She blinked, clearly thrown by my tone. "You're overreacting," she said quickly. "You've always had a place here." I cut her off with a soft smile. "No, Tessa. I've had a use here. There's a difference." She opened her mouth to argue, but found no words. In that silence, I could almost see the truth dawning on her, maybe, for the first time. After she left, I closed the door gently and sat back down at my desk. My hands were steady as I organized the papers Helen had given me, each one a small shield against the way they'd tried to push me out. That afternoon, I walked through the neighborhood to clear my head. The winter air was cold and sharp, but it felt good against my skin, bracing and honest. I watched the people around me, young families laughing together, old friends sharing quiet conversations at bus stops. I realized that home isn't just four walls and a roof. It's a feeling, a right to be seen, to be safe, to belong. I stopped at the little bakery on the corner and bought myself a cup of coffee. The woman behind the counter smiled at me, warm and genuine. "Cold day to be out," she said. I smiled back. "It's never too cold to start something new," I replied. I meant it too. When I got back, I found Aaron waiting in the living room. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes tired. For a moment, I saw the boy he'd once been, the boy who'd fallen asleep on my lap, who'd run to me when the world felt too big. But that boy was gone, and the man in front of me had made his choice. "I wish you'd just let this go, Mom," he said softly. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We thought it was time for you to move on." I met his gaze evenly. "Maybe it is time I said. But it's my choice when and how. Not yours. Not hers." He sighed, looking down at the floor. "I didn't think you'd fight back." I reached out and touched his arm, my hand steady. "You didn't think I remembered how I said. But I do." And in that moment, I think he understood. The days ahead would be hard. There would be more conversations, more papers, more late-night doubts. But I knew I wasn't alone, not anymore. I had a voice, and I was going to use it. The morning Helen's letter arrived, I was up early, pacing the small kitchen, like I used to when Aaron was a boy and couldn't sleep. The smell of coffee filled the room, comforting and steady, but my hands still trembled slightly as I waited. I'd spent years pushing my feelings down, swallowing them in the name of peace. Now those feelings were rising up like a tide I could no longer hold back. When the letter slid through the mail slot, I took a deep breath and picked it up. The envelope was thick, the paper inside smooth and heavy. I read the first lines slowly, my eyes tracing every word like it was a prayer. Helen didn't waste time on pleasantries. The letter was clear, direct, and polite, but every sentence carried a quiet power. It outlined my rights as a resident, the legal protections I was entitled to, and the consequences if Aaron and Tessa continued to treat me like an inconvenience instead of family. Reading it felt like a balm, like someone had finally put my feelings into words I could hold in my hands. I slipped the letter back into its envelope and set it on the table in front of me. My heart was steady now. I wasn't doing this out of spite or anger. I was doing it to remind them and myself that I mattered. When Aaron came home from work that evening, he found the envelope waiting for him. He looked at it for a long moment, his face pale. I watched him from the doorway, saying nothing. Finally, he picked it up and tore it open, his eyes scanning the pages. "What is this?" he said, his voice tight. "It's what I deserve," I said simply. He looked up at me, his jaw working. "You didn't have to do this, Mom. We could have figured something out." I shook my head. "You made your choice when you put my things in trash bags," I said quietly. "This is mine." He didn't argue. He just sat down at the table, the letter clutched in his hand, like it was a lifeline he didn't know how to hold. Tessa's reaction was different. She stormed into my room later that night, her face flushed with anger. "How dare you bring lawyers into this?" she snapped. "Do you know how this makes us look? We were trying to help you." "Help me!" I cut in my voice, calm and even. "You don't help someone by throwing away their life like it's nothing. You don't help someone by treating them like they're disposable." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue, but didn't have the words. "You've always been so quiet," she said finally, her voice dropping. "I didn't think you'd fight back." I looked her in the eye. "That was your mistake." She didn't have an answer for that. She just turned and walked away, slamming the door behind her. I didn't flinch at the sound. That night, I sat at my small desk, writing in my notebook. Each word was like a small anchor, grounding me in this new reality. I wrote about my memories, my dreams, and the quiet strength I'd found in the face of their rejection. I wrote about the home I'd lost when my husband died, and the home I was determined to build for myself now. I didn't know what the next steps would look like. Helen had said this was just the beginning, a letter, a conversation, a chance to stand up for myself in a way I never had before. But even if nothing changed overnight, I felt a power in simply knowing I'd started. The next day, I went to see Helen again. Her office felt warm and safe, the smell of fresh flowers in the air. She smiled as she ushered me in. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm okay," I said. And it was true. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was really okay. She nodded. "You've done something important, Mrs. Tran. You've reminded them that you're not invisible. You have rights and a voice." I smiled at that feeling, it settled deep in my bones. "Thank you, Helen," I said. As I left her office, I stepped out into the cold winter air, the sky bright and sharp above me. I felt the chill on my cheeks, the weight of my coat around my shoulders. And I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. I wasn't done yet. I had more to say, more to fight for. But I had already taken the first step, and that was enough to keep me moving forward. The days after Helen's letter went out felt different, quieter somehow, like the air in the house had grown thick with things unsaid. Aaron didn't meet my eyes when we passed in the hallway. Tessa moved around me like I was a piece of furniture she didn't quite know how to avoid. There were no more sharp words, no more orders barked at me like I was an employee in my own home. But that didn't make things easier. It was strange seeing them realize that I wasn't the same woman who'd folded herself into corners for their comfort. It was as if they were meeting me for the first time, and they didn't know what to do with the woman standing in front of them. One morning, Aaron knocked softly on my door. I could see the hesitation in the set of his shoulders, the way he fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. "Mom, can we talk?" he said. I nodded and let him in. He sat down across from me at the small table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "I didn't think it would come to this," he said quietly. We thought you'd be happier somewhere else." "Somewhere else?" I asked softly. "Or just not here?" He flinched, and for a moment I saw the boy he'd been, the one who used to look to me for comfort when the world scared him. "We didn't mean to hurt you," he said. "I swear. But we have our own lives now, our own plans. We thought you'd understand." I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "I do understand, Aaron. But what you did wasn't about helping me. It was about making me disappear so you wouldn't have to feel guilty anymore." He looked down, shame, and something like regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. I let the silence stretch between us, let the weight of it settle in the room. "I don't need your apology," I said finally. "I need you to understand that I'm not going to be treated like a burden. Not by you, not by anyone." He nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging. "I know," he said. I didn't. I didn't expect you to fight back." I managed a small, sad smile. "That was your mistake." Tessa kept her distance. I heard her on the phone sometimes, her voice low and tense, talking about legal threats and consequences. I knew she was worried about what this meant for them, how it might look to the neighbors, how it might complicate their comfortable life. But I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd made her choices, and now she was learning what it felt like to face the consequences of them. One evening, Helen called with an update. "They've responded," she said. "Aaron's agreed to mediation. He wants to find a solution that respects your rights and your dignity." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Thank you, Helen," I said. "For everything." She laughed softly. "You're the one who did this, Mrs. Tran. You're the one who stood up and said enough. I'm just here to make sure they hear you." After I hung up, I sat in the living room for a long time, the soft hum of the city outside the only sound. I thought of all the nights I'd spent lying awake wondering if I was wrong to want more, if I was selfish to want to be seen. But now I knew the truth. I wasn't selfish. I was done shrinking to fit a life that had grown too small for me. A few days later, we all sat down around the kitchen table, me, Aaron, Tessa, and Helen on the phone. It was the first time we'd all been in the same room, without the weight of old resentments hanging over us like a storm cloud. Aaron cleared his throat. "We're sorry," he said, his voice shaking. "We want to make this right." I nodded, listening. "I want to stay here," I said firmly. "But I won't stay if I'm treated like an outsider in my own home." Tessa's eyes flickered, her lips pressed together, but she said nothing. I could see in her face that she understood now, maybe for the first time, that I wasn't someone she could just push around. Helen's voice came through the speaker, calm and clear. "We'll put it all in writing," she said. "Your rights, your space, your security. No more trash bags. No more treating you like you're temporary." As the conversation wound down, I felt something shift inside me. A weight lifting, a door opening. I'd spent so long thinking that standing up for myself meant losing everything. But the truth was, it meant finally claiming the life I deserved. That night, I stood at the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the darkness. I thought of all the quiet battles I'd fought over the years, all the ways I'd made myself small so others could feel big. And I promised myself I'd never do it again. Because they might have tried to throw me away. But I was still here. And I wasn't finished yet. The agreement was signed on a sunny afternoon. I sat across from Aaron and Tessa at the small kitchen table, a steaming mug of tea in front of me. Helen had walked me through every word, every clause, each sentence, a quiet promise that I would never be treated like an afterthought again. Aaron's eyes were downcast as he slid the papers toward me. "We're sorry, Mom," he said quietly. "We should have handled this differently." I met his gaze steadily. "I'm glad you're starting to understand," I said. My voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the finality in it. I was done explaining myself. Done apologizing for wanting to be seen. Tessa didn't say much. She signed the papers with a tight smile, her eyes flickering with something like embarrassment. For once, she didn't argue or protest. She just signed her name and slid the pen back to me. It wasn't an apology, but it was enough. After they left the table, I sat for a long moment, my fingers resting lightly on the fresh ink of the signatures. It felt like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. My chest felt light, like I was finally breathing in a world that had room for me. I spent the next few days reclaiming my space both in the house and in my own heart. I unpacked the few things I'd held onto the quilt my mother had sewn, the small wooden box of letters my husband had written me over the years. I hung my photographs back on the walls, each one a small defiance against the way they'd tried to erase me. The apartment felt different now. It was still small, still noisy with the life of the city beyond the window, But it was mine again, mine in a way it hadn't been in years. I found new ways to fill the silence that used to weigh so heavy. I started taking walks in the mornings, greeting neighbors I'd never had the courage to speak to before. I began volunteering at the local library, reading to children whose laughter filled me with a warm, steady joy. I planted a few herbs in small pots on the windowsill: basil, rosemary, mint, small green flags that said, "I'm here. I'm growing. I belong." And through it all, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Not in what I'd given to others, but in what I'd finally given myself. The right to be seen. The right to stand tall, no matter who tried to push me down. Aaron and Tessa kept their distance, but that was all right. We spoke when we needed to, but the boundaries were clear now. There would be no more trash bags, no more whispered insults or casual dismissals. There was respect between us, if nothing else, and for now, that was enough. One evening, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, Helen called to check in. "How are you feeling?" she asked. I looked around the room, the soft light catching on the worn wooden furniture, the gentle scent of mint in the air. "I feel like I'm exactly where I need to be," I said. She chuckled softly. "That's all I could have hoped for you, Mrs. Tran." As I hung up the phone, I thought of everything I'd learned: the power of a quiet voice, the strength in a single steady choice. I'd spent so long believing that I had to accept what was given, to be grateful for scraps of kindness. But I'd been wrong. I'd found my place. Not because they gave it to me, but because I took it for myself. If you've ever been made to feel small, remember this: you have every right to stand your ground. You have every right to demand respect and claim your place in the world, no matter who tries to tell you otherwise. Share this story if you believe that quiet courage is stronger than the loudest insult. Let's remind everyone, your worth isn't up for debate.